Dementia is a scary process. What's going to happen to me or to my loved one? A lot of people recognize that dementia is a process of loss, and they think about things like losing their memory and losing other cognitive functions. What people don't know is when in the process they will lose control over the ability to make decisions for their own lives. It's the point where you are no longer allowed to make decisions for yourself. Today I'm going to share the hard truth about that process so that you'll know when, why, and how you lose the ability to make decisions for yourself in the process of dementia. With that knowledge, you and your loved ones can make decisions in time before it's too late and all of the control is taken away from you. So let's talk about the win of how people lose control when they have a diagnosis of dementia. In order to do that, we have to learn a little bit about the stages of dementia and what happens in each of them. There are several different models that you can use to think about the stages, but here we'll use the easiest one. This helps us to really focus on when people have or do not have control in their lives. The model consists of 3 stages: mild, moderate, and severe. And I'll use an example from a patient that I saw years ago to illustrate what can happen. Her name was Mary, and she was a warm, caring, lovely nurse for her career. And she was also an avid runner, to the extent where at one point she finished in the top 5 of the New York City Marathon for her age group. She came to see me after she had seen her primary care doctor, where they did one of those cognitive screens, and she didn't score as well as she had anticipated. After neuropsych testing and a battery of tests to help her understand cognitive strengths and weaknesses, we discovered some mild memory loss and increased difficulty fluently producing words when she was talking. She was diagnosed with a mild neurocognitive disorder. Eventually, we would come to understand that this was related to the process of Alzheimer's disease. In the mild stages of dementia, people start having, you guessed it, mild problems in their lives, and this was true for Mary. She forgot details and had to ask about them again. And she would often tell people something and then forget who she had told or that she had already told them, and so she repeated herself. She had been divorced for years, and she lived alone in a city where her children did not live. All of her adult children lived in different states, so they didn't see her that often. But her friends started to notice that she would forget lunch dates once in a while or mix them up a bit, and had a little bit of a harder time talking and expressing herself fluently. None of this seemed like a big deal because they were all experiencing some version of those problems. She needed more and more ways to compensate for these problems. So she started using reminders, and she carried around a notebook where she would write things down that didn't seem to stay in her brain as easily. She really liked using her calendar. Her friends started calling her the sticky note queen because she had yellow sticky notes plastered everywhere in her attempt to remember things and stay on top of them and be organized. She had to replace her phone 3 times because she kept losing it or misplacing it. She even invested in a new fancy pill organizer because her old system of taking her medications out of the bottles just seemed a little bit too confusing, and she would forget to do it once in a while. Mary always got her own tax information organized for her tax professional, but this year it just took her longer. She had to ask her tax professional to file an extension, and she even waited for her daughter to come in from out of town to help her find just the last couple of documents. She always used to plan and drive and meet her friends at the beach, where they would have this lovely winter solstice gathering and celebration and talk about all the new things that they were doing and do crafts and connect and just have a wonderful time. This year, it was harder for her to plan and organize, and she said, you know what, I just don't really want to do that this year, so a different friend did it. She also didn't really feel comfortable driving to the beach, so she caught a ride with someone. While Mary was making changes to work around the mild problems in her life, she was still firmly in control of what she did and how she did it. The mild stage of dementia is the land of increased frustration, as it's harder to do the things that you've always done, but the continued ability to use systems and different organizational techniques to get it all to work. Mary kept jogging, she saw her friends regularly, and she kept active. This is the stage where we want to stay as long as possible, and you are in control. As Mary's functioning slowly worsened, she entered into the moderate stage of dementia. This is a stage where all the problems that you had before and all the things that you tried to do just keep getting a little harder. Her pillbox kept things organized for her, but now she was forgetting to take them every day like she was supposed to. Her daughter surprised her with one of those fancy electronic pill organizers that have an alarm that goes off and reminds you to take it, and it worked pretty darn well for her. She never forgot to pay a bill because she was hypersensitive about those kind of things, but she started overpaying them. She might pay the same bill 2 or 3 times in her attempts to ease her anxiety to make sure she didn't forget it. When her family realized this was happening, they said, there are easier ways to do this, and they put most of her bills on auto pay, so she never really had to think about them anymore. Once she gave her credit card information to someone who called and pretended like they were from the IRS, saying that she had a tax payment due. The credit card company flagged the first unusual transaction, and the whole thing was discovered. It was solved, it wasn't a big deal, but Mary felt terrible about it and vowed to make sure this never happened again. Her children started worrying more about her ability to make good decisions in those situations where someone might try to scam her. When her son came to visit her after more than a year of not seeing her, Mary couldn't remember her closest granddaughter's name. Now, not only was this embarrassing for Mary, but it was concerning to her son and other family members. Her son also noticed the condition of her house, which had historically been really clean and tidy. But now it was getting more cluttered. There were stacks of things and piles of paper, and Mary was saying she just couldn't really get herself to get them all organized and get rid of them. That night, Mary's family had a private meeting talking about their concerns about what they saw was happening for her. The next day, they met with Mary and asked her to collaborate with them to address some of those concerns and to figure out what they might do differently. The goal was to maintain her functioning and independence. Mary felt anxious and embarrassed, but she had the conversation with them and she agreed to start having caregiving help in her home 3 days a week. She really did this so that her kids could stop worrying about her. But she didn't really think it was necessary, and she was hoping they would all just kind of forget about it and leave her alone to keep living her life. Mary continued to have control over her decisions, but the ongoing problems with safety and other issues related to her health and wellness signal a major turning point in how she was interacting with her environment. Others were starting to become worried about her ability to maintain her wellness and safety. This is the point where Mary is starting to lose her voice. If she doesn't act now, her environment will eventually force her into decisions she may or may not want. So let's follow Mary down 2 different paths. Both of them lead to the severe stage of dementia, but with very different experiences for Mary. The first path is the most common. It's the path of denial. Mary is frustrated and irritated that she's being forced to accept help in her own home. She repeatedly doesn't want them there, and she starts sending people away, saying that she doesn't need their help and they should just leave. She does this so many times that the individual caregivers refuse to come back, saying they can't do the work that they were hired to do. Eventually, the caregiving service that managed the caregivers stopped being willing to send people to her home. Mary realizes at some level she's having more problems, and she desperately tries to manage them by using more sticky notes. She also stops doing many of her activities because it's just too difficult to organize and manage them and get to all of them in a way that really works. She loses touch with friends because she doesn't want people to come to her home and see all of the clutter and mess. She also denies having any of these problems when she sees her doctor. As Mary continues to decline, neighbors, friends, and family see more signs of these problems, like driving the wrong way down a one-way near her home and repeatedly locking herself out of her own home. After Mary spends most of one night shivering outside in her nightgown, a neighbor recognizes this as a real issue. She calls Mary's daughter and expresses concern about Mary's ability to live alone independently. Mary's family comes back together without her involvement and starts planning what to do, what they need to do to keep her safe. When they do involve her, it's not the especially collaborative meeting where they're talking to her about how to keep her in her home and allow her to remain independent. What they've seen and observed is that she isn't working with them, she isn't allowing external help to come in and address the problems, and she's not safe to be there anymore. They no longer have evidence that she's able to use logic and remember the conversations well enough to work with them to stay independent in this way. They take her to several assisted living facilities to check them out, with her protesting the whole way. And when she seems to protest a little bit less at one of them, they decide, okay, this is the right one. This is where she needs to go. While Mary briefly considers hiring an attorney and fighting all of her children on these ideas and these moves and these changes in her life, ultimately she gives up. It's too hard for her to think through all those details, to organize her behavior and make that happen. She doesn't feel like she has the energy to oppose them, and she is worried about her own functioning. Mary's story is really quite common. Sometimes the details can vary. Sometimes it's a pure memory problem that causes most of the issues, where people just can't remember enough to organize their behavior and stay safe and healthy. Sometimes it's more of a frontal lobe or executive function issue, where the person's ability to use logic, to problem solve, to ask for help, or even to have the basic insight that they're having a problem goes away. Since they don't think they have a problem, they can't collaborate with people to work around the problem, and they need to have more help in a safer environment. Sometimes it varies about who's involved and how the process goes. Maybe it's not adult children, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a care provider, or maybe it's even adult protective services who gets called in. Sometimes people get more chances to try to live at home before everyone realizes this just can't work, or they can't afford to stay at home with extra help. But ultimately, the choice of what happens in this denial scenario ultimately goes to the people around the person having the problem, not to the person themselves. Control is lost. Now let's look at an alternate path, the path of collaboration. Let's rewind. Mary might be still in the mild stages of dementia, or maybe entering into the moderate stages where things are getting harder for her to manage. People are starting to notice, and her strategies for coping aren't working as well. At this point in the collaboration model, Mary realizes this can't last. She's going to need more help eventually, and she wants to be the main voice of how this happens. She calls her children together for a family meeting, and they are actually surprised that she initiated such a talk. While some of them are quite sad or surprised about what Mary has to say, and others even argue, it's not that bad yet. We don't need to worry about it. Ultimately, Mary helps them understand about her concerns. They eventually see that she will need more help and that this is the time to figure it out. They go through different scenarios, thinking about what could go wrong. Things like, Mary just can't take her medications accurately on her own anymore. Maybe Mary has too much difficulty managing the household, cooking for herself regularly, maintaining the place, decluttering when she needs to. Mary at some point won't be able to drive and won't get to the places that she really wants to go. She's going to have more difficulties with finances at some point, and she might be more susceptible to scams. Ultimately, she might not be able to get to the activities she loves or keep being as social as she wants to be. They make a plan to address each of these issues, proactively working together to address them before the issue happens. Mary decides that she wants to stay in the town that she currently lives in for as long as she can, and that eventually she's going to need more help, including help within her home, and then eventually moving to some type of retirement community or supportive community that can have more services and resources available to her. They find a caregiving company that can provide in-home care and look at her finances about how long that can last in terms of her ability to pay for it. And then they also work together with a service to interview communities. Mary is the strong voice leading all of these things and expressing her preferences for what she wants and doesn't want. When she finds one that looks especially pleasant, she puts her name on the waiting list for it. Mary even invites one of her children to start going to medical appointments with her, whether that's in person when they're visiting or virtually. As they do this, they can implement together all of the healthy lifestyle things that Mary can be doing to optimize her functioning, her medical wellness, and her quality of life. While these conversations are not the ones you dream of having, they are critical to maintaining control as you go through the stages of dementia. Mary was involved with every step of the process, and she got to have a say in all the different ways that she would have help. As Mary progressed through the moderate stage of dementia, there was no question about whether or not she needed help. It wasn't optional anymore. The collaboration model helped her have control over the timing and type of help that she needed. As Mary evolved through the third stage of dementia, severe dementia, her body started to fail in more significant ways. Her memory problems were much more severe, and she would forget information seconds after she heard it or saw it. She spoke a lot less because her brain didn't allow her to access the rich vocabulary that she once had. She struggled to recognize and verbalize her basic needs, like when she was hungry or in pain or cold. Sometimes she couldn't express that to people, and people around her in her environment had to be watching and looking for signs that she was uncomfortable to be able to help her meet those needs. She became more slow and unbalanced. It was a fall risk. Eventually, she wasn't no longer just not running or jogging, but she couldn't walk fluently and she was in a wheelchair. She needed help bathing, grooming, and even toileting. And incontinence became much more of a problem. Chewing and swallowing was more difficult to do safely. In the denial scenario, Mary was moved to a nursing home near one of her children without having any say in the process. There, she slowly dwindled, and after 2 years of this progressive decline, she passed away. Her loss of control was complete. In the collaborative model, Mary and her children as a unit had already decided that she wanted to move near one of her children in Florida, and she proactively picked out a community where she wanted to live. Now, this was a memory care unit, as they recognized she would need that level of help. But she went there, she interviewed and toured them and asked questions and observed residents, and she made an informed decision about what environment would be best for her. Her daughter and teenage grandchildren were nearby, and so they planned that they would be able to visit almost daily. When the time came for the move, they had already figured out the type of room she wanted, how she wanted her favorite things present, what music would be playing most of the time, and how her family could provide comfort and soothing when she was under stress. While she did lose control and she needed significant assistance, her wishes for what she wanted and how she wanted were carried out to the fullest extent possible. While most people think that loss of control happens in the severe stage of dementia, it actually happens earlier, in the moderate stage. By proactively choosing the collaborative model, you can extend the amount of control and quality of life that you get to direct for a much longer time in your experience. If that sounds like a better path for you, it would make sense that you are able to recognize when there are signs of dementia so you can know what's coming. So I made a video walking you through the biggest signs of dementia so that you can recognize them. I really appreciate your coming today and talking about these hard things, and I can't wait to see you again. Bye.